Hey, ladies and gentlemen.
Hi!
Oh, look at this. Welcome to another Wednesday evening. I'm Tommy.
And I'm Joe.
This is Tammy.
Hi!
And this is ToJo Live.
Welcome to ToJo Live.
Y'all
guys are
know,
nuts.
y'all know if I'm on this side of the screen, something is bad wrong.
Oh, wrong way.
What are
Trying
you
to
doing?
get you
I
in the
was just
screen.
like,
There
are
you
you
go.
trying to shut me off?
It's reversed on the screen.
I'm
So
trying to
I thought
get
I
it.
was pushing you in it.
Yeah.
Well, folks, as you probably noticed, we're having a few technical problems, but they'll be
No,
fixed
we're just
soon.
having fun today. Oh my goodness. All right, go for it.
Never a dull moment here at ToJo Live. So,
Make sure everybody can hear us. Leave a message.
yeah, leave a
comment.
message if you can hear us. We want to make sure everything is running the way it's supposed to. This week and last week, we've had some issues. Last week, we didn't even get to do the show. So hopefully you guys can hear us out there today. But welcome to ToJo Live, where we are here to discuss your questions about life, faith, and the church. Now, we're going to go ahead and do our typical opening here and just hope that everything that is working correctly. If not, we'll repeat it later. So here's our verse. It's actually two verses today. Philippians chapter 4, verses 12 and 13. Paul writes, I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all this through him who gives me strength. Now, that's a powerful passage, because what Paul is saying there is whether he's got a lot or whether he's got a little, he has learned to be content in all situations because he gets his strength from the Lord. Now, what it doesn't mean is, ooh, I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. Ooh, I can, jump over the Empire State Building, or I can plow my head through a mountain, or I could, swim from here to Europe. That's not what it's saying. It doesn't mean I can do every impossible thing out there that you've ever thought of because, ooh, I believe in Christ. What it's saying is, and if you see it in context, going back to what he says, I know what it is to be in need. And I know what it is to have plenty. I've been in both situations. I've had lots of money and materials and wealth. I've been completely broke. That's what he's saying. I've learned the secret of being content in any and every situation. What he's saying is, regardless of the situation, he has learned to be content. His contentment does not depend on the amount of money he has or doesn't have, or anything else. He even goes on to say, whether well fed or hungry, whether he's had plenty to eat or he's going hungry because he has so little to eat, he's learned to be content. Whether having plenty or in want, whether he's had a lot and available to him, more than he could possibly need, or if he's been in a situation where he doesn't have anything, he's learned to be content in all of that. Why? Because he can do that through him who gives me strength, through him who gives Paul strength. He's saying I can be content in all these situations. Why? Because my contentment does not depend on my circumstances. My contentment depends on Jesus and who he is.
Amen.
All right, so it looks like we got Karen on here with us.
We are on.
Saying
we are
hi.
live. All right. Oh my goodness. There's Chris Klingon.
Oh, is Chris on with us?
Yes. Hi, Chris.
Good to have you on here, Chris. It's been a while since Chris has been on here with us.
I gotta come over here and show my husband how to run this side of it. All right.
We are having technical difficulties, and our monitor is working, but when it works, the wire that is used to make it work, the sound goes out, so I can't hear anything. And if we make the sound work by unplugging the wire, then we can't see anything on the monitor.
So I have to come over here.
We figured it'd be better to hear than to see and not hear.
Yeah.
And
All
so
right.
Tammy has to run back and forth.
I'm actually going to teach you because you're going to have to run this. So see this right here? When you want to see, you hit show and see. I made it say welcome. And then when you want to go to the next person, you just scroll down to the next one and hit show.
Are you just trying to work yourself out of a job?
Yes, I am. There you go. So scroll down and let's take a look at all your comments.
Brother, you're going to get double pay for this. You're doing 2 jobs tonight.
I know, right? Absolutely. All right. Our quote for the day comes from Trina Paulus, and she says, "How does one become a butterfly? You must want to fly so much that you are willing to give up being a caterpillar." I love that quote. Because in order to stretch beyond where we are, we've got to leave our comfort zone. A caterpillar is comfortable being a caterpillar. But the full potential of a caterpillar is not to remain a caterpillar. The full potential of a caterpillar is to become a butterfly. But it has to go through a painful experience to get there. This whole cocooning experience, and then breaking out of the cocoon, which from what I understand, and I'm not an expert in this, but from what I've been told, actually strengthens the wings of the butterfly, the work that it does to get out of the cocoon so that it's able to fly. Without that process, it would not be able to fly. Still be pretty to look at, but it wouldn't live very long because it can't be as mobile as it needs to be in order to survive. And so the whole process, as painful as it might be, helps the caterpillar to reach its full potential. You know, you cannot get to second base by remaining on first base. You've got to leave. Is it safe there? Yes. You can't get out. As long as your foot is on that base, nobody can get you out. The second you leave that base to try to get to second base, there's a potential for you to get thrown out. You've got to put forth an effort. It's not comfortable making that run. But you didn't get to first base for the purpose of remaining on first base. You got there to go to second base, and then potentially third base, and then potentially home plate. That's where you score the run. You could get on first base 1,000 times and never score a run. Because first base is not the potential. The potential you want to reach is home plate. But you got to go through first base and second base and third base to get there. But you got to be willing to sacrifice. You got to be willing to take the hits. You got to be willing to fail by getting thrown out or tagged out while you're running in order to reach your potential. The caterpillar was not meant to remain a caterpillar. So I love that quote. How does one become a butterfly? You must want to fly so much that you are unwilling to give up being caterpillar. So, how are you this evening, Joe?
Brother, it's good to be back. You know, I know we weren't here last week, and I wasn't here the week before, I don't believe. So, yeah, it's good to be back. And I love the quote. You know, I think the reality is that there's so many people that are afraid to make the change, you know, because, you know, change can be challenging for a lot of people, for most people, you know. Right. So a lot of people would rather stay in their comfort zone, would rather stay on first base than take the risk for glory, you know, for an advancement, for a promotion. You know, I don't want to take that big project because if I mess it up, I might lose my job.
Right.
Well, you know what? The other side is if you do a great job, you're going to get promoted.
Yeah.
And the truth is, it's a lot for a lot of people. It's not worth the risk.
Yeah. And many of you have heard me talk about this before. Here's the cool thing about the comfort zone. We are oftentimes afraid or unwilling to do what it takes to leave our comfort zone, but our comfort zone will follow us. You may be comfortable on first base and uncomfortable thinking about trying to get to second base. But if you take the risk and you get there and you're there, you know what? You become comfortable again. And then at that point, you got to be willing to go to third base. And you got to keep stepping out of that comfort zone. But your comfort zone will follow you. Yep. At one time, all of us were uncomfortable trying to walk. When we were little babies, we'd get up, we'd fall down, we'd bump our head, we'd skin our knee, we'd cry, we'd get hurt, we'd get up, we'd take a few steps, we fall down, we get hurt, we cry, we get back up. You know, it was uncomfortable. But then eventually we got comfortable walking. Why? Because our comfort zone followed us.
Yep.
When you first step out of your comfort zone, it's going to be uncomfortable for a while. And depending on what situation it is, some things can be longer than others before that comfort zone follows you. But it will eventually follow you. When I first tried to learn how to drive a car, I was extremely uncomfortable. Now I'm perfectly comfortable driving a car. Everybody else is uncomfortable, but I'm comfortable.
I love it, brother. You know, brother, the other thing about the comfort zone, and this is something that I've seen with others, and I've experienced it myself, is that when there's something you're going to do for the first time, you know, there's anxiety that creeps in. You know, you're nervous. For a lot of people, that's getting up in front and doing a presentation or public speaking. You know, my son Christopher, he does a lot of public speaking, and he has autism, so it's a big deal. And he'll always tell me, Dad, I'm real anxious. And what I've said to him and what I've said to employees is that, you know what? It's good to have a little anxiety because that means you care. That means you want to do well. If you didn't care whether you did well or not, you probably wouldn't do well, you know? So it's good to have that feeling because you want to do well.
Right.
You want to be successful. It's not even taking a leap of faith because it's not. That sounds like jumping off a cliff. It's just moving forward, taking a step ahead, going from first, getting a little lead off of first base before you take that sprint.
Yep, exactly. I had a preaching professor at Johnson that used to say that you never really get rid of the butterflies before you preach. You just learn how to get them to fly in order.
It's the truth.
Yeah, it is the truth. And you're right. You know, if you ever get to the place where, you know, you're doing something and you're like, it's no big deal. I'm not nervous. That is, you know, it could be because you don't really care whether you do well or not, or you don't see the importance of it. Listen, every time I get up to preach, I realize, you know what? I am being given the responsibility of proclaiming the word of God. And you realize that that word is more valuable than any other word. It's more valuable than what we read in the newspaper or a magazine or the newest, most important book of the year or whatever, any news show or talk show or anything. Let me just tell you, the word of God is much more valuable, much more important than the State of the Union address or any other political speech and I'm not saying those aren't valuable. They are. They're extremely valuable. But none of it is as valuable as the word of God. And to think that you have the responsibility of standing before people and proclaiming the word of God accurately, that's a heavy responsibility. And if you take it lightly, you probably shouldn't be doing it.
Amen.
Yeah. So,
Amen.
all right. Tammy's walking over here.
You've had the same comment up there for 15 minutes. You got to cycle down or nobody's going to get to say hi. See? You go down and say hi. There's Karen. See?
Hello, Karen. And Francesca.
Chris Klingen.
Chris Klingen.
He's here.
All right.
Aww. And there's Christine.
Hey, Christine.
Hey.
See, you got to... Hey.
Hey.
All right, then hit hide if you want it to go away. You can't leave the same comment up there the whole time because then they'll go.
And Aura's on as well. Hey, Aura.
Aura just came on.
Is Aura on there? Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah.
You got it?
Nice. I'm not sure I have it, but we'll see.
You're getting there. You're getting there.
So it comes up automatically. I don't have to scroll down or anything, do I?
It'll say new messages and it'll point.
All right. Okay. Are we ready for our scores?
Oh, gosh. I'm just worried about getting the trivia on there. All right.
Do I need to get the trivia on there?
No, I got it.
Are you doing it from your phone?
I've got that from my phone.
All right.
It may come up from me, though. I'm not sure I switched accounts.
That's gooder.
All right. Krista, 0. Krista, you need to dial in here.
We usually don't give zeros. We just give ones. And
oh. Well, but Krista doesn't need a 0.
But then you would list everybody who.
I was going to say, it'll take the whole ToJo to do that.
We got Laura, Angela, Aura, and Karen all with 1 point. We've got Joan and Christine with 2. We've got William with 3. Mark Hendricks with 4. Oh, Karen only had 1. Sorry, I left you off, Karen. And Marianne and Vinny have 6.
Ooh.
6. So there you go. That's where we are.
All right. Here is the question. What is the one book in the New Testament that we do not have a record of who wrote it? What is the one book in the New Testament that we do not have a record of who wrote it?
Put it up there. When you see it come out.
Oh.
See it?
Ah, there it is.
Is it there?
Woo.
Woo!
Oh, that was quick.
Oh, Chris Klingen.
Chris Klingen is on the board.
Did he
Hebrews.
Did he hear us talking about him a couple weeks ago? When we said that Chris used to come on here and was like top contender.
He did. Oftentimes we wouldn't know Chris was on until we asked the question, and then boom, out of the blue, there was Chris with the answer.
Chris, you're on the board. Oh,
you are on the board.
Karen and Francesca came in second there.
Yep.
Yeah, you got a little bit of competition there, folks.
So that is correct. The book is Hebrews. Now, we do have several books in the New Testament that are not signed. In other words, are written anonymously. It doesn't say, hey, this is the Gospel of Mark and this is what I wrote on there. But we have record of who wrote all of those books from early church history and early church fathers. And there wasn't really debate. It wasn't like, oh, wow, who wrote Mark again? It was just, it was common knowledge, or the way they wrote about it, it seemed to be common knowledge that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John wrote the Gospels. Most of Paul's letters, if not all of them, actually have his signature on them. The book of Acts doesn't, but it was accepted early on that it was written by Luke. And so many of the New Testament books do have signatures on them, but a lot of them do not. Hebrews is the only one that we do not have a historical record of who may have written that book. And so that book for us today is completely a guess. But we do know that Hebrews was accepted as authoritative writings within the early church. And that's why it is included in the New Testament. Sometimes people have a misconception of how the New Testament was put together. They get they think that at the Council of Nicaea, which was in the 300s, 325 or something like that, I think. Sometimes people will argue, well, they got together and they determined what should go into the New Testament and what shouldn't. And that is not exactly accurate. The books that were accepted as authoritative was already in place, especially for the New Testament. And so what they did is they just got together and compiled them together instead of them just being separate books and letters floating out there. They brought them together in one collection, and it came to be known as the New Testament. And I think what is the way Frank Turek words it? It's not that, oh, I should have looked this up before the show. It just popped into my head. It's not that the Council of Nicaea got together to determine what books were authoritative or not. What they did is they got together, and this is not how he says it. He says it much cooler than this. They got together and combined those that were already accepted as authoritative. In other words, the Council of Nicaea was not a small group of guys who got together and said, okay, we're going to say this book is authoritative, but we're not going to say this book. That is not what happened. Historically, over the course of more than 200 years, those books were already accepted by the church as authoritative writings for the church, and they just put them together.
So Tommy, on Sunday, you mentioned the word chronos being time, and we think of like chronological. Was that what they did in Nicaea too? They had all these authoritative books, but they decided how they would come together in what order, or was it?
To be honest with you, Joe, as far as the order goes, I'm not sure. I would have to look that up. But my assumption is yes, they decided the order. Now the order is somewhat chronological. And I say somewhat because we know that the Gospel of Mark, we're pretty sure that the Gospel of Mark was the first of the four Gospels that were written. And of course, it's not the first book. Matthew is the first book. But as far as the chronology of time that it covers, we know that the four Gospels cover the life of Jesus. Mm-hmm. Immediately after the life of Jesus is the book of Acts, placed within the story of the book of Acts. Many of the letters were written, and if you get a chronological Bible, and I have one, and they're good Bibles to have for study and things like this. It's pretty interesting. What many of them will do is wherever it took place chronologically within the book of Acts that, say, Paul wrote Romans, then it will insert the book of Romans into that part of the book of Acts. And then once you read the book of Romans, then it goes to the next part of Acts and continues on until you get to the part where he wrote Galatians, and then with that. I do not think, and I would really have to look this up to be for sure, but I do not think that Paul's letters are necessarily in chronological order in the way they are placed. But in a general sense, we do see that because we do know, we're pretty confident that the book of Revelation was the last book written in the New Testament. And obviously it is at the end of the New Testament. But again, chronologically, that would be correct placement for the book of Revelation as well. Not just chronologically of when it was written, but and that's kind of odd too, because it was written as it was happening. Unlike the book of Acts, it was written after it happened, and the Gospels, which was written after it happened. The letters were written obviously as things were happening, and also with the book of Revelation, it was written as that was happening. So,
excellent.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
That is good stuff. Sometimes you will hear the argument, because there are some arguments that much of the New Testament, if not all the New Testament, some people will argue that none of the New Testament was written in the first century, which is blatantly false. We may not know exactly when they were written, like the exact year, but we have a general span of most of them, and all of them fit within the first century AD.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes people will argue that they weren't written in the first century, and we don't know who wrote them, and therefore they will make the argument that Jesus never met any of the New Testament writers. I have heard that argument by atheists, that if Jesus existed at all, and listen, most atheists agree that Jesus did exist. I mean, we have historical evidence outside of the Bible that Jesus existed. But there are a few people that will even argue that Jesus probably didn't exist, that Paul probably didn't exist, in all of this stuff. But we have evidence outside the Bible that gives authenticity to the Bible. As I said earlier, many of the church fathers in the early second century talked about many of the New Testament books and made reference to the Gospels and who they were written by in that. To say that they were not written until a few centuries later is to completely deny the historical record of when they were written. And listen, if you're going to do that, why not do it with George Washington? I mean, how do we know George Washington existed? All we have is historical written record that he existed. And we trust that because, I mean, there's not really any reason. It's not like the things we read about George Washington in historical documents are telling fairy tales, or they're telling, stories about Superman or Spider-Man or, something like that. Because sometimes you'll get that argument with the Bible as well. Oh, well, just because it mentioned historical places, Spider-Man comic books mention historical places that exist while that story is being told. Is that evidence that Spider-Man is true? Well, no, because that's not a historical document. It's a fictional story written for entertainment that uses present day historical things as landmarks within the story. That's completely different than a historical document, something recording something that actually happened. And so in references to the New Testament, we have writings. And listen, we have some reference to the happenings of the New Testament by people who were not even followers of Jesus. Josephus, Tacitus, and others, they were not even followers of Jesus. They were not Christians. And yet they make references to things that happened in the New Testament, and specifically to Jesus himself. And so when people make the statement, Jesus never met any of the New Testament writers, they cannot back that up historically. Historically, the person that was given credit for writing the Gospel of Matthew was Matthew. That's why it's called the Gospel of Matthew. And Matthew was an apostle of Jesus. He was there. It is an eyewitness account. Now, all four Gospels are not eyewitness accounts, but we know confidently that at least two of them were. Matthew was one because he was an apostle, and the Gospel of John we know was an eyewitness account because John was also an apostle. John wrote the Gospel of John, 1st John, 2nd John, 3rd John, and Revelation. He wrote 5 books. He was an eyewitness account of Jesus and who he was and what he did. And if you read his book, you know it doesn't come across as, ooh, I'm making up a fantasy story here of like Superman or Spider-Man or something. He wrote about a historical person that historical references outside of the Bible and even outside of the church make reference to. And Josephus even makes reference to the resurrection. Not that he believed it happened, but he makes reference to the point that there are followers of Jesus who proclaim that he resurrected, that he rose from the dead. And so that was not a myth that was made up centuries later. That was something that was historically documented, that at least there were people running around in the 1st century claiming that Jesus rose from the dead. And John was one of those. Also, the book of James, written, which is not anonymous, by the way. James puts his name on that book. He identifies himself. This is the James who was the brother of Jesus. I mean, it's hard to get more eyewitness than that. I mean, this guy is blood. The book of Jude, which is a very short book in the New Testament, but it's there. Jude identifies himself, and most people believe, again, we don't know 100% sure, but most people are pretty confident. Most biblical historians, biblical historians say that Jude was also a brother of Jesus. Now, we do know that Jesus did have a brother named Jude or Judas. Jude was short for Judas. It's not Judas Iscariot. This is a different Judas. But he identifies himself in writing the book of Jude. And so there would be another author of the New Testament that literally met Jesus. Again, it's hard to get more eyewitness than a brother. And then finally, we have Peter, who wrote 1st Peter and 2nd Peter. And in both he identifies himself as the writer of these books. We also know that Mark was discipled by Peter or mentored by Peter. And most people seem to think that Mark got most of his information from Peter. Now, there's a chance that Mark may have met Jesus, but we don't know that. We don't know. But we do know that he was a companion of Peter's. Mm-hmm. And most people believe that he probably got most of his information from Peter. Now, here's another thing that atheists will point out. That if we got any comments, I get onto this stuff and I forget to look over.
You gotta look over there.
Oh, Chris Klingon says he usually watches on Thursdays. So he still watches us. He's just not typically live.
I told him, but we don't get to talk back to him on Thursday.
That's true.
He needs to watch us when we can talk back. Or maybe that's why he doesn't watch us.
That's why he doesn't. That's right, Tammy.
Hey, be careful.
Some atheists will bring up the fact that, Mark was written first and Mark never met Jesus. And most people seem to think, and this is true, that Matthew probably got a lot of his information for his gospel from Mark's gospel. And there is some evidence to that probably did happen. And then they go, well, if Matthew was an eyewitness, why did he have to get information from a non-eyewitness in that? And listen, Joe and I can be somewhere and we witness the same thing happening. And if I leave and then Joe writes something or preaches a message on that, then he's got that. If later on, say a year or and maybe even a decade or more of a distance between a distance of time between Mark's gospel and Matthew's gospel, and I begin to write that, just because I was there doesn't mean that I won't lean on Joe for some information, because he's already done it. He's already written the book or letter or preached the message or whatever. It doesn't mean that I wasn't there just because I lean on Joe for some information and clarification on things. And so just because Matthew may have gotten some information from Mark doesn't mean that Matthew wasn't there. And Matthew probably could have written it without that. But maybe the Holy Spirit led him to use Mark's gospel for information in writing the gospel. You never know how that goes, but that does not nullify the authenticity of Matthew writing a gospel just because he relied some on the gospel of Mark. And we know he didn't rely 100% on it because he's got more information than Mark does. Mm-hmm. It's a longer letter or longer book than what Mark's is. So we've got some additional information in there. So now, Paul met Jesus, but it was different. It was a vision. And of course, the atheists like to argue, well, it was just a dream. He didn't really meet Jesus. Maybe there's something to that. But, I mean, still, if you literally met Jesus in a vision, I mean, that's pretty impactful right there as well. And so that doesn't do anything for me as far as doubting the authenticity of the writings of Paul. Maybe it does for some who don't believe, and if that's the case, that's okay. We've got plenty of eyewitness information without Paul's letters that would lead you to believe if you bought into that. So maybe Paul's just icing on the cake for that. So here's another thing that I wrote. Early church father, and I didn't write this, I got this from the internet. Early church fathers from the 1st and 2nd centuries accepted the authorship of these books, the ones I just mentioned, Matthew, John, James, Jude, and Peter. One of them being Irenaeus, who was mentored by Polycarp, who was mentored by John. So John, who was an eyewitness, who was an apostle, he actually mentored, or in the church we like to use the term discipled, Polycarp. Polycarp was from late 1st century into early 2nd century. And then he later mentored or discipled Irenaeus. And we today we have writings from Irenaeus with him referencing the authors of many of these books, including the 4 Gospels. And so if Irenaeus, who was not an eyewitness, but was discipled by a disciple of John, I mean, that is pretty close right there. It's pretty close. I would trust the writings of someone who was mentored by somebody who was mentored by John than somebody who's just kind of picking out of thin air here in the 21st century about what they think happened. So, what say you about all of this?
Yeah, no, well, I think a couple things when we talk about Paul, you know, and the vision that it was more than that. He was blinded, you know, so he lost his. I mean, that's more than just a coincidence, you know. I mean, he saw Jesus, he was talked to by Jesus, he was blinded, and for an atheist or anyone to kind of say, well, that really didn't happen. I mean, here's a guy who persecuted and killed and imprisoned Christians, and you know, a week later he's preaching the gospel.
Yeah.
and for the rest of his life did that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so there's I think there's verification of the authenticity of Paul throughout his life.
Right.
But even in that instance, he had that vision. And Ananias also had a vision in a separate place that was connected with that vision. Okay? That doesn't happen by circumstance. Okay? That was by divine design that took place. But in most situations with atheists, anytime you give them good solid evidence, they just reject it.
They do everything they
matter
can.
how solid it is.
They just want to discredit it every way they can, and that never happened.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, like I said, you could do the same thing with the writings about George Washington. If you wanted to go, well, am I just supposed to trust what they wrote? How do I know he existed? Maybe the United States has always been here. Maybe it wasn't something that happened. Maybe there was no Christopher Columbus. Maybe he didn't really exist, and this place wasn't discovered. It's just always been.
Right.
I mean, you could do that, but historically, it makes no sense. It makes no sense. And just like many of the claims on the authorship of many of the New Testament books and all of that stuff, you can make those claims, but it doesn't make sense when you look at the evidence.
Absolutely.
All right. Here's my question to you guys. If you had to ask one question about life, faith, or the church, what would that question be? If you had to ask one question about life, faith, or the church, what would that question be? And so we're looking for answers. Hey guys, I want to mention a couple of weeks ago, somebody mentioned during prayer request time about our enthusiasm experience. And I just wanted just to share a little bit about that. I don't talk a lot about it at church because I don't want that to be a place for an enthusiasm experience commercial, on a regular basis. But I do want to make you guys aware of what's going on. This year, we're doing our enthusiasm experience in Kentucky. Last year, we did it in New York, up in the Catskills. This year, it's going on in Kentucky. And I will tell you, for all of you that are connected with Glen Cove Christian Church, you do get a significant discount on that. So check with me on that if you want to go. It's a little over 50 hours that we spend together, and we're looking specifically on breaking out of the monotony of the mundane and the mediocre so you can break through to your enthusiasm zone. We go through 8 decisions that must be made in order to make that breakthrough, and we dig deep into that stuff. We have some one-on-one time. We have a lot of group time. We have a lot of instruction. We have a lot of fun. After all, it is called the enthusiasm experience. And so we get enthusiastic. We have some loud music and jumping around and stuff like that. But we also have some time when we're getting deep into these issues, dealing with our mundanians. If you've heard me talk about mundanians, those things that keep us from living out our enthusiasm and living in our enthusiasm zone. And so I want to play a quick video talking a little bit about our enthusiasm experience. And I may do that a few times over the next few weeks, just to make you guys aware of what's going on. Like I said, we don't do this in church because we don't want to make church a time for commercials and stuff like that. But we do want to make people aware of what's going on. And we may end up putting some information back on the welcome table as well. And so, do you want me to try this, or do you think?
No, you can't.
Oh, come on!
Really? It's like 12 steps. You got it?
12 steps.
Yeah, you got to mute him. Sorry, Joe. We're going to mute
That's
you.
okay.
It's down. Go back to wherever it's showing.
All right, you do it.
Oh, my goodness. Y'all, I love my husband.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are here going through the technical aspects of ToJo as you are watching Usually this is behind the scenes. But today we want to give you a behind the scenes look at how the magic happens.
All right.
Here on ToJo Live.
Be quiet. There we go.
Leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. And when you have the ability to influence, you can make the world a better place.
Are you ready to break out of the monotony of the mundane and the mediocre? Are you ready to break into your enthusiasm zone? Are you ready to invest 2.5 days to change the rest of your life? This retreat is not about better business, better relationships, or even creating a better you. It's about discovering the better you that is already there. Experience a group of people that are motivated to be a part of a God-sized movement.
We all fail, but are we going to fail backwards or are we going to fail forward? You will learn how to use your failures to achieve success. Gain an understanding of what you want most in life. Learn to make key decisions that lead to real results. Discover the steps to changing your life permanently and close the gap between where you are and where you want to be. Once you start doing what you thought was impossible, you will conquer whatever gets in your way. If you can accomplish your dream all by yourself, it's too small.
This 2.5-day enthusiasm experience retreat will help you break out of the monotony of the mundane and the mediocre so you can break through to your enthusiasm zone. Join us in the beautiful bluegrass region of Central Kentucky, September 6th through 8th, 2024. Discover the 8 decisions you can make to more consistently live in your enthusiasm zone.
Are you ready? Here we go!
It just gave an opportunity to look down inside and to pull out what's already in there.
I needed the time away. It's a good escape, really more connecting to God.
It has made me grow exponentially in 50 hours. I no longer have an excuse to say, I don't know what I want to do.
Right.
Because I know exactly what I want to do.
Awesome.
He was everything that I was hoping for him to be.
I want to soar like an eagle. That's what I want to do.
Okay, there we go.
Well done. Well done. I want to know who. There was a guy a couple times in there that looked like your younger brother.
Scott. I bet it's Scott.
No, it was Tommy at a younger age.
Yeah.
Oh!
That was pre-pandemic. That was pre-pandemic me.
That's great. There was one shot was on a basketball court. Was that down in Kentucky?
When were we on a basketball court?
I don't know.
I'd have to go back and look.
That's okay. I think it had a. I don't think it was in New York. I mean, very cool.
So,
well done, Tammy. That was good.
Yeah, Tammy makes those videos and does a great job. So again, if you want any information on that, you can go to TommyLandham.com for that. And if you want to go to it, let me know because you do get a significant discount if you're connected with Glen Cove Christian Church. So Christine came up with a question, and I'm going to try and show it. I got to hide one and then bring up the other one. Ooh, I did it.
You don't necessarily have to hide. Just go to the next one.
Oh, you don't have to hide?
Yeah, just
okay.
hit show on one of them and it makes the previous one disappear.
Christine's question is, when is Jesus coming back? I want to meet him. Well, we're all out of time, and so we'll have to get to that. No, just kidding. We don't know. We don't know when Jesus is coming back. And I heard somebody say, listen, a lot of people have predicted this over the years. There was a book written in 1988, 88 Reasons Why Jesus is Coming Back in 1988. When he didn't come back, the guy kind of said, oh, sorry. Then he wrote another book. And listen, the first, that book sold a lot of copies. He wrote a second book called 89 Reasons Why Jesus is Coming Back in 1989. That book didn't sell as many. And so, and then I don't think he did one for the 1990. But listen, nobody knows. A lot of people have guessed. A lot of people try to calculate and all this stuff. But I heard somebody say one time, I'm not on the planning committee. I'm on the welcoming committee. And so that is my stance. I'm not on the planning committee. I'm not trying to figure out when exactly he's coming back. I'm just here to welcome him when he does. And I'm like you, Christine. I want to meet him. I am ready to meet him face to face. Whenever he's ready to come back, I'm ready for him to come back and experience all the blessings that come with that, and eventually, being taken up into heaven. And man, I am looking forward to that day. So, Joe, you got any closing remarks for the evening?
I'm just looking forward. I think we're going to be wrapping up the sermon series this Sunday. And I've heard a lot of great feedback. It's been real exciting to be part of it. A lot of people have said it's been kind of like a slap in the face to really count your marbles, start counting your days. And I think it's something that we all need to, take part in. Absolutely.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And we're wrapping that up this Sunday. I know we had a lady there this past Sunday that was new. She was a first-time visitor, and she was asking Tammy at the picnic. She came to the picnic, which went awesome, by the way. Everybody that was at the picnic, and especially our volunteers that put everything together. Jeff Forgion did an excellent job. I know Chris Klingon helped a lot with that, and many, many others that helped a whole lot with that, and it was just amazing. But at the picnic, this lady was talking to Tammy, and she was asking about the series. She's like, how long is this series? And Tammy says, well, we've had 2 already. Today was the 3rd one, and then the last one will be next week. And she goes, well, I want to come next week and hear how this wraps up, but I also want to hear the first 2. And Tammy showed her how to get
awesome.
Back and watch the other 2. So if you haven't seen all the messages of this series, I would encourage you to go back and watch those. And we're going to wrap that up this week, and looking forward to that as well. So guys, thank you for being on here. We apologize for the technological difficulties we had in the beginning. Apologize for not being on here last week, but we will try to minimize those as much as possible. We love you and hope you have a great rest of the week.
Hold on, I can't get in here. I love you guys. I'm going to kill my husband. Why isn't he still on here?
Thank you for joining us.